Welcome to Counterspin, your weekly look behind the headlines of the mainstream news. I'm Janine Jackson. Memorial Day is a sober occasion, a day set aside for reflection on the irretrievable losses incurred by war. It's a legacy of the U.S. Civil War, which killed 625,000 people out of a nation of some 35 million. But to hear some conservative pundits tell it, there's something wrong about being asked to reflect on war, and questioning whether we could have avoided it is a metaphysical impossibility. History is an infinitely complex web of causations, said New York Times columnist David Brooks. Quote, "To erase mistakes from the past is to obliterate your world now. You can't go back and know then what you know now. You can't step in the same river twice." Close quote. Therefore, Brooks says, quote, "The question, would you go back and undo your errors, is unanswerable." Close quote. Well, the subtext here, of course, is that presidential candidate Jeb Bush's difficulty in answering the question of whether he would have invaded Iraq is completely understandable. What we should learn from Iraq, Brooks says, is the need for epistemological modesty. Quote, "We don't know much about the world, and much of our information is wrong." Close quote. Brooks does know, however, that the idea that the intelligence about Iraqi weapons of mass destruction being cooked by political pressure, a big political conspiracy to lie us into war, is a, quote, fable, close quote. Conservative columnist S.E. Cupp also wrote a column about the uselessness of asking a candidate to Monday morning quarterback the Iraq War. Quote, "Giving them a time machine isn't telling us anything," close quote. And Jeff Jacoby at the Boston Globe took issue with the field day journalists and politicians were having with Bush's trouble with the question. Quote, "Obviously there will be no do-over of the Iraq War authorization. The next president can't hop a time machine back to 2003, close quote. Declared Jacoby, quote, "History is always messy, especially the history of wars and their aftermath. Rarely does the decision to fight proceed as expected," close quote. With all this talk about epistemology and the messiness of history, it's easy to forget that what Jeb Bush was being asked to do was not to travel through time, but to say whether or not he agreed with a decision made by the last president from his party, who also happens to be his brother, that was based on lies and resulted in the deaths of minimally 500,000 people. It's an important question whose answer is obviously not obvious. Iraq's population is some 33 million. The war and invasion are at least on the scale of devastation inflicted on the U.S. by the Civil War. When that happened to us, it left a wound that we're still commemorating 150 years later. When the U.S. does it to another country, somehow 12 years later, it's distant history that it's silly to dredge up. You're listening to Counterspin, brought to you each week by the Media Watch Group Fair.